Alright, so I'm going to be taking a look back now, back to the original notes that I had where it all started. When we first got the 94 pages of police reports and the 464 photos. So the first note I have is a total of 9 officers / detectives involved in the investigation. This was reported at 12:56 p.m. on January 17, 2015. Police arrived on the scene at 13:04 p.m. And then the scene was cleared. According to my notes here, the scene was cleared at 17:09. Okay, so I have a note here on page 3. Officer John Broughton wrote in his report that Judy Prochnow discovered the bodies after going to check on the family and packages that were left on the front doorsteps. Judy saw the bodies through the front living room window. It's page 3. Now we know that Colin Prochnow was actually the one who found these bodies, who first called in these bodies. So if you were just to read this in a certain way, you might interpret it that Judy Prochnow found the bodies first, when we know that's not true. Colin did. This is interesting. John Broughton did not see any other fresh footprints in the snow other than animal tracks. And the question was, whose animal tracks is Officer Broughton talking about on page 4? Now, what type of animals would be in that area? Over here, of course, cats, right? Cats, dogs. We have the raccoons here. We have skunks here. We have other critters here. So when they say animal tracks, that to me doesn't... It could mean a lot of different things. Okay, Broughton also says that the patio door was open slightly 1/4 inch, not locked or secured with a bar lock. Still page 4. Let's see, the only light that was on was the dining room light. Still page 4. The Christmas tree lights and other strings of Christmas lights were still lit. So this also was like a little head scratcher when I first read it. I was like, okay, so they're saying there's only one... The only light on in the house was the dining room light, yet the Christmas tree lights and other strings of Christmas tree lights were still lit. So it wasn't just the dining room light. There were other lights that were on too. That's pretty much what it's saying. The Prochnows told the police that they had very limited contact with the Crowleys, who almost always have their drapes pulled down on their living room window. They thought it was unusual that the drapes were up recently for such an extended period of time. The Prochnows believed they last saw the Crowleys just before Christmas. Still page 4. Okay, so the neighbor across the street at 1048 Ramsdale Drive last saw the Crowley family sometime just before Christmas. That's page 4. We're going to talk about Mr. Brett, or / Brent. We'll talk about him later. All right, Officer Greg Dahlstrom noticed several obviously deceased bodies lying on the floor near the front picture window. That's page 5 now. A dog was lured outside and captured. Okay, Sergeant Greg Dahlstrom arrived at the Crowley house first, page 11, and met with some neighbors. Now, Broughton took photos of the exterior early on before any crime scene tape was put up. So the 464 photos that we got were most likely, the ones that are titled DSC, were most likely taken from Officer John Broughton. CSO Booth was able to coax the dog out of the residence. Very important to note that the mailman comes around 1 p.m., page 11. So we kind of get a good idea of about what time the mailman might usually show up, about 1 p.m. Lorraine Tuppy, living at 1047 Ramsdale Drive, told police that she hadn't seen the Crowleys in over 3 weeks. Colin Prochnow came over and asked if she knew where the Crowleys might be. Tuppy stated that she thought they had possibly gone to Texas for the holidays and just weren't back yet. Page 11/12. So she knew that the family, so Tuppy knew that the Crowleys would go to Texas, and Tuppy also had David's phone number, one of David's phone numbers. I think one of 4 phone numbers of the Crowleys. So I thought that was very interesting when you couple that with the fact that if you look on David Crowley's bulletin board in that back room, kind of by the kitchen area, next to where the bookshelves are or whatever, you can clearly see, somebody pointed this out, you can see Colin Prochnow's number is pinned to that bulletin board. I found that very curious because when I spoke with Judy, she said, she didn't really know them, didn't really talk to them, might have talked with David once, maybe twice, but maybe not the same for Colin. I mean, obviously there's some reason why David would have Colin Procknow's phone number. At least I would think so. So that was interesting to note. But yet, it doesn't sound like Colin or Judy had David's number that Tuppy had. So I found that very curious too. All right, then we go down to Tara Becker, and she reports that Colin Procknow said that he heard and saw the dog inside of the Crowley residence early this morning and thought it unusual since he had not seen anyone come and go from the Crowley residence. He conferred with his wife Judy, and she made mention to him to check and see if the Christmas presents that were on the front stoop were still there. It's page 12. Colin then went outside and noted that the Christmas presents that they had observed being on the front stoop on January 10th, 2015, when they left to go to the airport, were in fact still on the front stoop today. So from January 10th, 2015, till the bodies were found 7 days later, January 17th, those presents were there. There's no indication that they noticed, that anybody noticed those presents being there before that time, before the 10th at the very least. Now, we will also note that the neighbor across the street, Brent or Brett, however you want to say it, the one who lived at 1047 Ramsdale Drive, right across the street, looked at David, saw him, from what we're going to read here. He said that he didn't notice those presents on the front stoop until January 17th. So, not very nosy neighbors, which is a very good thing. It's not a bad thing. Okay, Colin Procknow also observed that the presents were actually scattered about, and he picked them up and stacked them back up. Colin then checked inside of the front picture window and observed what he thought to be dummies. Colin stated he now knows that they were the bodies of the deceased, but first he thought that they were dummies or some type of props that were left in the residence to appear as though they were home when they weren't. After looking inside of the residence, Colin then went back to his residence, told his wife Judy about what he had seen, and then she confirmed that they were deceased persons and immediately called 911. It's page 12. So we're back to the whole dummy thing, and that was one of the first things. I think a lot of the early conspiracies and the theories that the government killed David, or that they were in a witness protection program, or that it wasn't really them, was based on this. So you have Judy in the 911 call jumping the gun and already calling 911 and saying, I think there's a murder or a suicide here, which is kind of strange. And then here you have Colin, from what he's saying, and he's being very honest here. He did not have to say that he thought that they were dummies at first, but now he realizes that they weren't. So maybe that's because in his 911 call, that's what he said. He said he saw what looked like dummies. He's later corrected on that. But I think that was a big point, because how could these, if you look at the way that the bodies were kind of laid out, there's no way that you would look at that scene and think that these were some type of props that were left in the residence to appear as though they were home when they weren't. That was interesting. Now that could be the police putting words into Colin Procknow's mouth, kind of just going through a summary. We need the actual statements, the actual quotes. That's what we need. All right, still on page 12 now. It was December 9th or 10th when Colin woke up between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. to the sound of gunshots. Page 12. He checked out the back of his residence and thought it was fireworks. He thought the gunshots came from the area of the Crowley residence. Now, if you read on page 12, you'll see, well, first, Colin Procknow says kind of maybe towards the end of December, he's asked to kind of narrow it down. He comes down with maybe the 9th or the 10th. Okay, and this is one of the things. Well, this is one of the big things that the media picked up on here. Is in September of 2014, Colin noticed a big change in David's appearance sometime in September of 2014. Most alarming to him was that he observed that David only dressed in army fatigues and had shaved his head into a style of a mohawk. Colin indicated that they never had a conversation about his appearance change, but they still had friendly contact after his change in his appearance in the September-October months of 2014. Page 13. So it's almost like nothing here, but if you were to read the media reports, those first ones, this was a big thing. They really pointed this out. They were really trying to paint David as well. He had this mohawk, like the guy from Taxi and or Taxi Driver. Okay, there was another neighbor on Ramsdale Drive, Ann Hickson, and Hickson noticed that there is a certain light or candle that has come on every day since Christmas. Page 13. So maybe it was on a timer. Maybe these lights were on a timer. What is this certain light or this certain candle that comes on every day? I am going to guess and say, is it possible that it was the Christmas lights that weren't lights? You know, there's only one light, the dining room light, but these Christmas lights, were they on a timer? So I haven't seen a timer in any of the photos that we've seen yet, but it might be good for us to keep an eye out, see if there's any evidence of any timer that might show why certain lights would come on at a certain time. So we have Brent/Brett, who lived at 1048 Ramsdale Drive, across the street. His window faced the Crowley residence. And when the police went back to speak with him, he was no longer there at the residence. So that was another question. Okay, what did police talk with him about? Why was he no longer there? More so, why did police need to even follow up with Brent/Brett? Well, Brent/Brett is the guy who looked out the front window, looked directly into David's front window, and saw what he thought was David, according to the police reports. They kind of looked at each other from a distance, and then Brent/Brett closed his blinds, and that was it. That was Christmas Eve. That was the last time he saw David. That was the last time anybody has reported seeing David.